I'm Jake, and my life was forever altered by the horrifying events that unfolded within the walls of our family home. It was a night of unspeakable tragedy that unleashed a haunting presence beyond our understanding. As a child, I idolized my older sister, Emily. She was my protector, my confidant, my best friend. But our happy family life took a sinister turn when our father, consumed by his demons, committed an unspeakable act. One night, after a heated argument, he set our beloved home ablaze. I'll never forget the searing heat, the acrid smell of burning wood and melting plastic that filled the air. I was helpless, watching in terror as the flames consumed the house. And worst of all, my sister, Emily, was trapped inside. Her screams, echoing through the night, will forever haunt my nightmares. I tried to reach her, to save her, but the inferno was relentless. My father's face, twisted by madness and remorse, is etched in my memory as he held me back, tears streaming down his face. By the time the fire brigade arrived, it was too late. Our house was reduced to ashes, and my sister, my dear Emily, had perished in the flames. The grief that followed was unimaginable, tearing our family apart, but the horror didn't end there. In the weeks that followed, strange occurrences began to unfold in our new home, a modest house we had moved into after the tragedy. Doors would slam shut on their own, eerie whispers filled the air at night, and chilling drafts swept through the rooms, leaving us cold and trembling. I knew it was Emily. Her restless spirit had returned, seeking answers, seeking justice. I couldn't blame her. The pain of losing her was a wound that would never heal. My father, stricken with guilt and remorse, fell into a deep depression, refusing to acknowledge the strange happenings in our home. One night, as I lay in my bed, I felt a presence in the room. The air grew heavy, and the temperature plummeted. And then, in the dim light, I saw her, my sister, her face distorted by the flames, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Jake," she whispered, her voice a ghostly echo. Tears welled up in my eyes as I reached out to her, but my hand passed through her ethereal form. She was trapped between worlds, a tortured soul seeking closure. "Why did this happen, Emily?" I choked out, my voice trembling. She looked at me, her eyes filled with pain, and then she showed me. Her memories flooded my mind, and I saw it all: the argument with our father, his violent rage, the blaze that had claimed her life. My father, in a fit of madness and anger, had sealed her fate that night. I couldn't bear the weight of that revelation, the knowledge that my own father had caused my sister's death. Emily's presence grew stronger, her restless spirit now a vengeful force that wreaked havoc upon our home. My father's guilt finally consumed him, and he confessed to the authorities. He was arrested and taken away, his own demons driving him to madness. But Emily's spirit remained, trapped by the tragedy of that night, unable to find peace. In a desperate bid to free her, I sought the help of a paranormal investigator. Together, we performed a séance, hoping to communicate with Emily and guide her to the other side. The room grew cold, and I felt her presence once more. "Emily, you can let go now," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. She hesitated, her form flickering, but then she slowly faded away, her anguished expression softening. I knew it was her way of saying goodbye, of finally finding the peace that had eluded her for so long. With Emily's spirit gone, the disturbances in our home ceased. The weight of the tragedy still hung heavy in our hearts, but there was a sense of closure, of justice served. I wish I could say that everything returned to normal, that the scars of that night faded with time. But the memory of the flames, the loss of my sister, And the haunting presence that had once filled our home would forever linger in the shadows of our past, a reminder of the darkness that can consume even the closest of families. I'm Mark, and the events I'm about to recount are etched into my memory like a nightmare that refuses to fade. It all started innocently enough. With a house that held secrets darker than the night. We moved into the old Victorian house on Oak Street, drawn by its charm and history. It was a beautiful structure, with intricate woodwork and stained glass windows, but it held a darkness that we couldn't have anticipated. My wife, Sarah, and I, along with our young daughter, Emma, thought it would be our forever home. The first inkling that something was amiss came when we heard faint whispers in the dead of night. At first, we dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on our ears, but the whispers grew louder and more distinct. They seemed to come from the walls themselves, as if the house had secrets it yearned to share. Soon, our peaceful nights turned into nights of torment. Doors slammed shut on their own, and footsteps echoed in empty corridors. Objects moved inexplicably, and the air grew icy cold. Emma, who was just 4 years old at the time, began to see shadows in her room, and her cries of terror sent shivers down our spines. But the climax of our horrors came one fateful night. Sarah and I had just settled into our bed, exhausted from another day of enduring the inexplicable. The whispers had grown louder, an eerie chorus that filled our heads. As we tried to drift into sleep, the whispers intensified, and a low, mournful wail filled the room. We clung to each other, paralyzed by fear. And then, in the darkness, we saw her, a spectral figure, her eyes filled with sorrow, her hand outstretched. "Help me," she cried, her voice a haunting echo. We recognized her instantly. It was Emily, the previous owner of the house who had died under mysterious circumstances. Her spirit had never left, and her pleas for help had grown desperate. Before we could react, the room erupted in flames. The fire seemed to originate from nowhere, consuming the walls and ceiling with relentless fury. We were trapped, the inferno growing hotter by the second. Sarah and I coughed and gasped for air as smoke filled our lungs. In that hellish moment, Emily's apparition appeared before us, her face twisted in agony. She reached out, and a blast of icy air swept through the room. It was as if she was trying to protect us from the flames, but her spectral form was powerless against the inferno. We lost consciousness, the pain and smoke overwhelming our senses. The last thing I remembered was the sound of sirens and the distant cries of firefighters battling the blaze. When I awoke, I was in a hospital bed, my body battered and burned. Sarah was beside me, her face bandaged, her eyes filled with grief. Emma, miraculously unharmed, was in the care of a relative. But our world had been shattered. The fire had claimed the house, reducing it to a smoldering ruin. And it had claimed Emily, too. Her restless spirit had finally found release, but at a terrible cost. As the days turned into weeks, we tried to piece our lives back together. But the horrors of that night continued to haunt us. I could still hear Emily's cries for help in my dreams, and the image of the flames consuming our home was seared into my memory. The investigators deemed the fire an accident, but we knew the truth. It was the culmination of a haunting that had tormented us since the day we moved in. Our once peaceful home had become a nightmare, and we had paid the price. We moved far away from Oak Street, leaving behind the charred remnants of our dreams. But the scars of that night, both physical and emotional, will never truly heal. The house on Oak Street remains abandoned, a relic of a tragedy that no one dares to speak of. And in the darkness, I can't help but wonder if Emily's spirit still lingers, forever trapped in the echoes of her pain, or if she finally found the peace that eluded her in life.
I'm Emily. And my life took a chilling turn one fateful night when I became entangled in a horrifying spectral presence that had been lurking in the shadows for far too long. It all began in my quaint, isolated cottage deep in the woods. My fascination with fire had always been undeniable. There was something mesmerizing about the dancing flames, the way they flickered and swayed as if they held secrets of their own. I would often sit by the fireplace in the evenings, gazing into the fiery abyss, losing myself in its allure. One night, as I watched the flames dance, something unusual happened. The flames seemed to take on a life of their own, twisting and contorting into a grotesque, spectral figure. It was as if the very essence of fire had materialized before my eyes. Panic gripped me as I realized I was not alone in the room. The fiery specter gazed at me with eyes that burned like molten embers. Its form was ever-shifting, an ethereal and terrifying entity born of flames. My heart raced, and I wanted to scream, to flee, but I was paralyzed by the sheer horror of the apparition. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice trembling. The spectre didn't reply with words, but rather with a guttural, otherworldly growl. It moved closer, and I could feel intense heat radiating from its fiery form. I could scarcely breathe, trapped in a room with a creature that defied all logic and reason. As days turned into weeks, the spectral entity became a nightly visitor. I couldn't escape it, and its presence grew increasingly malevolent. It seemed to beckon me, to compel me to join it in the fire. I knew I had to find a way to break free from its grip, but I was trapped in a never-ending nightmare. Then, one night, the spectre spoke to me, not in words, but in visions. I saw a gruesome scene from the past. A mob of villagers, consumed by fear and madness, had burned a man alive at the stake. The man's agonized screams echoed in my mind as I witnessed the horrifying act of vengeance. The truth struck me like a bolt of lightning. The fiery spectre that haunted me was the vengeful spirit of the man who had been unjustly burned alive. He had returned from the ashes, consumed by rage and seeking retribution against the descendants of those who had wronged him. Terrified and desperate, I decided to confront the spectre. I researched ancient rituals and incantations to communicate with spirits, hoping to reason with the vengeful ghost. Armed with candles, salt circles, and a heart full of trepidation, I attempted to make contact. As I recited the incantation, the room grew cold, and the atmosphere thickened. The fiery spectre materialized before me, its burning gaze fixed upon my trembling form. I could feel its anger, its anguish, and its insatiable thirst for revenge. "Please," I implored, "I had nothing to do with what happened to you. I'm not one of them. Release your anger and find peace." For a moment, it seemed as though the spectre wavered, its form flickering. But then, with a roar that sounded like 1,000 infernos, it lunged toward me, its fiery tendrils reaching out to consume me. I closed my eyes, bracing for the searing pain, but it never came. Instead, I felt a gentle breeze and heard a whisper in my ear, a voice that seemed to be carried on the wind. It was the spectre's voice, no longer filled with rage, but with sorrow and regret. With a final burst of fire, the spectre dissipated, leaving me alone in the room. The curse that had haunted my nights had been lifted, and the cottage was silent once more. I often wonder if the vengeful spirit found the peace it sought, or if it continues to wander, trapped between the realms of the living and the dead. But one thing is certain, the memory of those haunting nights will stay with me, a reminder of the supernatural mysteries that dwell in the shadows, waiting to be discovered by those who dare to look too closely into the flames.